Hi, I'm Reed, this is Crowland Publishing, and today we're continuing our series on source material, which is going back to important and formative fantasy novels and movies and TV shows and games and all the rest of it, and seeing what we can mine for our own D&D games. And today we're talking about the Malazan Book of the Fallen, the 10 very big, very chunky books that are some of the best gaming fantasy ever written. Now, there's been a few fantasy novels that come out of gaming. The Rift World Books by Raymond Feist, probably well known. There was one in the 80s called The Guardians of the Flame, which is everyone gets dragged into their DM's world and becomes their PCs. The Expanse, of course, is some guy's science fiction game. There's been a few, but Malazan is the best one. Not only is it a great fantasy world, just in and of itself, it's really fun books, but also you've got a lot of fantasy politics of a powerful young empire that's growing up. And that started off as a shared world for two guys' D&D games, and one of them went on to become a writer, and then later on a second guy joined him, and then they changed it to GURPS about halfway through, but you can see the D&D influence especially. You see religious warriors with special powers, you see a divide between clerical magic and wizard magic, you see a lot of barbarians, a lot of ranger types, a lot of extreme environments in which character classes like that can thrive. And the backstory in the world is really about finding reasons to have magic and treasure left around and cool ruins to explore and all sorts of strange monsters running around. And everyone's really, really cool. This is a cool looking world, and it's because a lot of these characters started out as PCs. So even if you don't want to set a game set in this world, in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, you should read them, and we're going to talk about them just because they're a fantastic example of how a D&D homebrew game can look when it's taken to the extreme and when it operates at the highest level of excellence. And if you haven't read them before, you should, but if you have, we're going to go through some of the concepts and explain how we can use them for games. Now, not everyone likes the Malazan books. They're not above criticism. There's a little bit of disconnect between the first book and the second. It is very, very long, and sometimes it's very conscious that it is elevating the genre. Sometimes you just bloody say it, man. Stop writing poetry. And the Black Company books, which it is very much a response to, I think, better books, but we're talking about these today. And I honestly think that you can reverse engineer the Malazan book to learn about how to create a really memorable and vibrant campaign setting that's much better than the boring old Wizards of the Coast ones. So Malazan is what they call a hard fantasy world, which is that scientific assumptions about society and culture and geology and biology and all that sort of stuff exist until the supernatural elements come along and supersede them. So essentially, the Malazan is a world, it's in space, and it is surrounded by a whole bunch of different dimensions and planes. Here they are called warrens. A lot of creatures and entities and races have colonized the Malazan world from these warrens, but it was already very occupied because in the beginning, there was a race of super high-level mages that lived here called the Jagged, and they got into a big fight with Neanderthals. And then a race of magical technological dinosaurs rose up. And then humans evolved from monkeys, and those monkeys splintered into a dozen different sub-races, and that's kind of like a Neanderthal versus Cro-Magnon thing. So they're still around, though, and a lot of the times you just, oh, look, that's a slightly different race of human. How you go, mate? I married her. That sort of stuff. So already you can see how narrative is built into this kind of a game. You've got invading planes, plot hook, 3 ancient civilizations, plot hook, a lot of playable races, especially if you're a bit over Tolkien elves and hobbits. And on top of that, the invaders, the main ones, are you've got light elves, dark elves, and shadow elves. So everything that you've done here immediately in setting this up is done to generate adventures and cool PC concepts. Creative, but all in service to what will players need from this world. Then there's the gods, and this is where the D&D-isms really begin to kick in for the Malazan books. First of all, there's the elder gods, who are kind of like much more chatty and down-to-earth D&D primordials, much less about sort of cosmic phenomenal powers and just a higher order of entities. Then there's the regular gods, and the regular gods is any creature that has the power over a warren, over one of those extra-dimensional realms. Anyone can be a god if they can somehow take over a warren. More on that in a second. And gods are very much shaped by their warren. So the 2 gods of luck, they control the plane of luck. The fire gods, guess what they control? Guess what they appear like? Aspecting is very much an important part of the Malazan books about thematic unification. Now, the gods are very involved in the Malazan stories. They want to shape the destiny of their chosen peoples. They want to shape the destiny of the worlds, and they are involved in their own supernatural wars against one another as well. So they really like to control humans for their own purposes. They control them, they reward them, they scare them, they bless them, they bribe them. And the gods are important characters within the books as well. Now, anyone can technically take over a warren, which means become a god. Now, generally that means that you have to find the throne of the warren and sit it, but typically only ascendants can become gods. Now, you're going to like ascendants. Ascendants are essentially superpowered people within these worlds. And there's many ways to become an Ascendant, and there's many ways to get these powers. And I should just say, not all Ascendants are gods, but all gods are Ascendants. That's how that works. And so if you want to become these immortal superheroes, there's a lot of ways to become it, and it's important to a lot of characters within these books to ascend. A lot of people are trying to do it, or resenting that it happened to them, or trying to deal with Ascendants who are all very, very powerful. Now, you can become an Ascendant if a god blesses you. You can become Ascendant during a kind of magical accident. A guy falls into the plane of fire and comes out and he's all cool and bronze and stuff. If you swear a mighty oath, you can ascend. If you die in battle and you had a particularly brave and inspiring death, you can ascend. So in D&D terms, you want to think about them. I think a lot of people are tempted to go epic level adventurers, but I actually think anyone over level 10 should be explained by ascendancy, because you're clearly not humans anymore. You clearly got powers that are outside of human regular levels. So Malazan is a world where there's a lot of very, very powerful creatures and powerful entities, and Ascension explains a lot of them, and it also explains a lot of the conflict of the 10 very big books where these Ascendants are battling each other, and it becomes a very, very personal kind of fight between 20 or so of these great powerful entities. And I think that that is a great hook for a D&D game, because you want to ascend, you want to descend, and you are eventually going to be in this sort of special context of where their PCs have powers and their enemies have powers, and the rest of the world is kind of not on their level. So to any DM, the Malazan books provide you really strong examples of how the gods can be active in the world and not boring, stupid, remote dad figures in the sky like a lot of the times D&D presents them as. You can make your gods your enemies, and Ascendants also give you motivations for how to explain and how to get to really high-level sort of play. So the Malazan books are, again, really, really strong with hooks for the game. Back to the world building. So 10,000 years ago, there was a huge, big human empire. And it was very powerful magically and very powerful politically, and it conquered half the world. And then it collapsed, and in the wake of that collapse, a huge apocalyptic disaster occurred. So you've got the ruins of a vast empire that has fallen. And so you've got a lot of magical mutants that came out of that time, a lot of monsters, and a lot of the world is shaped by that empire. So a lot of colonies became nations, a lot of cults of the empire are now evil religious cults all throughout the Malazan world. So immediately you've got PC adventures and ideas coming out of this. If you want a weird monster, it escaped from the first Empire lab. You want a strange nation, it's a first Empire colony. You want a cool ruin to explore, it's a first Empire temple. And it didn't sink like Atlantis either. It's there for the plundering. It's not a remote, distant kind of myth. Again, the Malazan world over and over again is gameable. There's nothing that exists that you cannot interact with. This is an important lesson for DMs to learn. Inventing a world is very, very fun, but inventing a game world means providing a world that for players to have fun with, for players to engage with and players to interact with. Keeping things off the table is pointless, and the Malazan leaves nothing off the table. And finally, we get to 100 years ago when the Malazan Empire formed, and literally these novels are based on the actions of the gaming group who started this empire out of a pub, which is a pretty good campaign hook if I'm honest. And the Malazan Empire itself is hugely set up for adventures. It's hugely set up for narrative because there's a lot going on. When we first meet the Empire, the Emperor has just been assassinated and the head of his intelligence agency has taken over. So loyalists versus rebels, intelligence agencies are at war with each other, the Talons versus the Claw. There is a war going on with a nation of Dark Elves who ride dragons and who live in a flying castle and are hugely powerful. That's exciting. There's a revolution in a kind of India or Afghanistan conquered series of nations that's going to go off any second. The gods are very, very suspicious of the Malazan Empire, so they're moving against it. And of course, the overall narrative is that one of these primordial gods, the chained god, has escaped or is trying to escape. And he is using everything that he can to overthrow the entire board. And so there is a lot going on within the Malazan world. And more importantly, because it's such a diverse and interesting place, there is room for every possible PC and every possible class. Now, this is an empire roughly based on Rome, or more likely Byzantium, so you've got dozens of natures and cultures and polities to draw from. from shadow elves living up in the Arctic North who are harvesting seals, to barbarian Goliaths living in the wastes of Afghanistan-inspired nations, to sophisticated metropolitan economists. You've got every kind of PC. You've got clerics to deal with the whims and desires of gods. You've got the shield angels, who are a holy order of warriors, who are paladins. You've got dozens of kind of magic to represent any arcane class. A lot of nations have laws that account for assassins and thieves guild. This world is set up to play a game in. Politics, monsters, looting, exploring. It supports all modes of D&D. This is an ideal world to steal from for any kind of DM. Malazan is very good for what we would also in D&D terms call high-level characters. There's a lot of demigods, a lot of super wizards, a lot of champions of ancient powers. One of my favorites is a guy called Krupp. And Krupp is a brilliant example of how a high-level bard would work during play. He doesn't really sing or dance a lot. He does have a very, very cool dancing scene, but his main deal is that he knows things. He's very, very good at synthesizing and gathering information, and he's very, very good at manipulating people because of it. And so from his bar stool that he just drinks in all day, he manages to manipulate the entire world. Then, I think, the best example of a kind of high-level PC character in all of fantasy fiction, Anomander Rake. Anomander is Drizzt and he's Elric smashed together. He's got a cool soul-sucking sword, he's brooding and dark, he lives up in a castle, he has sex with an evil goddess, he's fantastic. But he's a really good example of how a high-level character would think about his own actions, her own actions. He's very aware that when he starts casting his game-breaking cheese combo level 20 Meteor Storm, that is immediately going to say to the world, oh my god, Anomander Rake is up to stuff, what's going on? So when he uses his powers, it invariably invites responses from different powers and factions and monsters and his enemies. So he's very careful when he thinks about using his powers. When he does it, it's friggin' cool, but it's just how a high-level character thinks about themselves and thinks about their own powers and about other high-level characters. Really, really strong example. And finally, PC classes are really a thing in this world. They're quite important. Everyone knows that sometimes kids are just born with powers. Bang, you got sorcerers. Quick Ben, Caleb, two of the main characters, they're obviously a wizard cleric and a rogue monk. And they just get together and they cause havoc. And where their powers come from is very, very important to them. The Segular Blade Masters, they live in an island. They just continuously punch each other in the head for practice all day. They're clearly monks. Wizards draw their energy from the warrens, from those dimensions that surround the world. And so magic has schools, and they have great reasons for being schools in the first place. There's loads and loads of people who are always making deals with gods. They are warlocks. Clerics are very, very important. People who can do magic from the gods are an important part of the game world. All of this world building reflects the rules of D&D and the milieu of D&D in ways that honestly many of the Wizards of the Coast game worlds just do not do. It is a really, really fantastic example of how rules would look to the people that live in the world of rules. Malazan is a fantastic world to play in. There are diverse threats and challenges that a small group of people can meaningfully face, and that is really, really exciting. And more importantly, you should be inspired by these books because they show the narrative possibilities of the D&D world. What does a Thieves Guild war look like? What's a Warlock patron want from you? The Chain God is a fantastic example of that. How does he pick his Warlocks? He's always looking for demented and insane and broken people. What does a divine force expect of a paladin? In the Malazan Book of the Fallen's case, they want one of the best bloody heroic deaths in all of fantasy literature. Oh man, we're running out of time. Anyway, wrap it up. The reason that I recommend that you read these books isn't just because they're good, fun fantasy books, although they are, but because the Malazan Books of the Fallen are the best example I can think of world building that is designed for gaming narratives to emerge from specifically. The world is designed to game, and that's its only real purpose. And even if you do not like the Malazan world, even if you don't like the books, they demonstrate how to provide DM and players with endless ways to engage with the world and to have adventures in it. And that is amazing. The world sustains the adventures sustain the world. Brilliant little system. And I haven't even talked about the dragons yet, the undead armies, the plagues of shape-changing, Anyways, get these books. Garden of the Moon is great. Like and subscribe. I'm Reed. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.